November 1st, 2019, and this is episode 14 of Plane Savers. Down Under. Today we're visiting the Australian Vintage Aviation Society here at Caboolture Airfield. Remember, that's where we started off. This is a different airfield, museum rather. This is the first 30 years of aviation, from 1900 to 1930. Most of the aircraft here fly, and it is the brainstorm of Natalie Goschel and Andrew Carter who have been the driving force in establishing the museum and getting it operational. We'll start off with looking at some of the aircraft, how they were before they ended up in their display stage. So here's the Newport 24. No wings. Yes, the fuselage and engine are done. Then we have most of the bits of the Henry Farman box kite. And it just shows you how much space that aircraft took in the hangar to lay it all out before we could start putting it together. I'll now ask James Smith, one of the volunteers here at the museum and also one of my colleagues involved in the museum, to introduce and talk about each of the aircraft on display.
So above us here we have the Condor 21. This was designed by a gentleman called Gustav Whitehead. He was a German-born, immigrated to the United States, and he worked in the Merchant Navy. 21 being this is his 21st aircraft he designed. It has a fuselage similar to a ship because he thought it would have the same flow-on effect through the air as what a ship would do through the water. This aircraft flew in 1901, 2 years prior to the Wright brothers' first flight. There's a lot of arguments on what actually determines the first flight, but Gustav Whitehead certainly has it documented now that it was him. It was powered by two 10 horsepower acetylene engines that drove two propellers and when on the ground had a tail shaft to drive the rear axle. The original was made by silk wedding dresses. Okay, so the next aircraft is the Johnson monoplane. These particular Johnson brothers are more well known for in and outboard marine engines. Initially, the United States were not interested in aircraft, which is hard to believe, and the Johnson brothers, this was their design. They used to sell joyrides on weekends to maintain a financial income. It was the first aircraft to have an aluminium component of the airframe. It is a wing warper, so it has no ailerons. The wing would twist, and with a rudder input, you would turn to the left or right, depending on which way you wanted to go.
It's a bit hard to see some of the wiring up there because of the roof of the hangar, but you can see how the wing warping would work up with that centre pole up there with all the wires going down to the wing.
So here we have a replica of the 1909 Demoiselle. It's a very petite and small aircraft. This is what you would have seen in the movie The Men and Their Magnificent Flying Machines. So, however, one thing in the movie that they don't tell you is the original had a pilot capacity of 50 kilos. So in the flying scenes, they actually had a young small lady flying it. And for all other footage, it was a man. Our aircraft here has an extra 120% larger wingspan. to allow a man up to approximately 75 kilos to fly, and the airframe is about 6 inches longer. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it works. It looks very, very basic, however, all aircraft were back then. This aircraft is unique. It is the only one that's known in Australia, and it's only here at TAVAS. So we've got the Henry Farman III biplane here. It looks very, very similar to the Bristol box kite. However, the Henry Farman biplane was flown to England, and the Bristol Aircraft Company bought rights to copy it. There are a few changes to it. The Henry Farman biplane has 2 tail wheels. The Bristol box kite has 1 tail dragger. They were originally designed with rotary engines, being a pusher aircraft. We have a Lycoming engine in ours for the same reason with the other aircraft: ease of maintenance, lots of parts, and cheaper to run. We have the Fokker III Eindecker. It was the first dedicated true fighter plane of World War I. It was also the first fighter plane designed with the interrupting mechanism for the machine gun to shoot through the propeller arc, which worked really well. It took a couple of years for the English to catch up with that design, and I wouldn't say they became equals, but things became more common between the aircraft. This aircraft was built here in Caboolture in this hangar, made out of Irish linen, using unbleached linen, and so the scheme it is in is its natural weathering colour. It has a rotary engine that was specifically built for it that puts out 110 horsepower. It uses a mixture of the castor oil with the fuel that lubricates the engine.
We'll just have a look at a bit more of the Eindecker so you can have a view of some of the components, the flying controls, the tail skid, and the rest of the work that was gone into this very nice aircraft. This is Dave Walsh, our engineer, having got the Eindecker to a stage basically ready to have a test flight. It's nearly finished and nearly ready to go.
Here we have the Bristol F2B fighter plane. It is painted to represent 1 Squadron Australian Flying Corps, and has a crew of 2, the pilot and a rear gunner. It was compulsory to have a secondary person due to the weight and balance of the aircraft. It also has a couple of hard points under the wings that could hold an approximate 20-pound bomblet on each hard point, and that was towards the end of the war. They also had an option of the single or twin Lewis machine gun. Depending on the requirements at the time would depend on how many guns it had. It had 8 spare magazines or cartridges for the rear gunner, and this is the only Bristol F2B that flies in Australia. A Fokker D8 Flying Razor. It is, you could call it the first pursuit plane. It goes fast, very fast. We have a 160 horsepower rotary engine in it, 9-cylinder gnome rotary engine. They originally had 110 horsepower in it. This aircraft is currently
Unserviceable.
This aircraft is currently unserviceable due to some fuselage cracking in the material. We are awaiting replacement. This aircraft does not have a radio, it has no brakes, and it has no ground steering. So it is a team effort for when this aircraft does fly to get it out to the strip and get it on its way. Once again, being a rotary engine, it uses castor oil for the lubrication, and it's a one-way system. It's a total loss system. There's no sump or pump to recirculate the castor oil. This is the aircraft that's got the original 1918 engine in it. So it's good to see we have an engine that's 101 year old that still flies. A Fokker D7. It was Germany's better fighter plane. It is a biplane. As you can see, we're in partial construction. These things take time. They were built with an inline 6 BMW or Mercedes-Benz engine. They took over from the Fokker D8, and the fuselage on this D7 is very similar to the fuselage of the D8, except for the engine mount to accommodate the inline 6 instead of the rotary engine. Our volunteer engineer and a few others do slowly get time in here to progress on the building of this aircraft. But as people appreciate, it doesn't happen overnight.
And again, here is a good view of the control column that you guys were working on, very similar to what's in the DR1, with the way these control wires come off these parts of that one shaft. But that's a great example of what goes into restoring these aircraft. Goes right down through the tailplane. We can see everything that's being done here. Down to the tail skid, the rudder. Yes, there's a lot of work to do, but it gives it a great view. Now, last but not least, we have one little plane, though there's another one missing. The Peton pole's not here. I think that's coming back from Oshkosh, isn't it?
Yes, or it's got a yearly happening.
Oh, it's yearly, sorry, no. Oh, that's right, it didn't go to Oshkosh, did it?
So here we have the Flying Flea. This aircraft represents a Mark 14 model. There were very, very many models. There were even two-seater varieties. Ours depict a single-seater. It was donated to us by the Royal Australian Air Force Museum over in Western Australia. And in many countries, the Flying Flea is actually illegal to fly. They were a dangerous aircraft. If you went nose down, you did not have sufficient push of the forward wing to regain and recover your flight. Ours has a lawnmower engine on the front to look the part. That wasn't the case in real life. They got a lot bigger, but as I said, they're banned in a lot of countries from flying.
Now, Mikey, this is just for you. This is our Fokker DR1, the triplane. It is an airworthy aircraft and flies regularly. It flies reasonable distances as well. So we'll give you a good look at this aircraft and what is going on, some of the issues I know. What engine's this one got in it?
It's got a Lycoming engine from a Cessna 172 because of the reliability, the parts, easy maintenance, and it actually has a bit more horsepower than the original rotary.
Oh, okay then, there we are. So here is the brake arrangement on this one. Unfortunately, as you can see, the fourth wing is complete, so we can't show you what went on with the spar and everything in here, the issues you're having over there. But we'll just have a look at some of the features of this aircraft. Let's see, I want to get out of the way of the sun so you get a good look at it. As I said, this aircraft does fly very regularly. Right. I'll see if I can get right down inside here for you. I'll turn the torch on. That's better with the torch on. And here we are. Here's the instrument panel for us. And the mock-up of the machine guns. We'll go down, look at some of the structure that you can see in through there. There's your rudder pedals. Your control cables here that are coming, that you were talking about in one of the episodes, how the control column worked and how the different cables worked on the machine. We'll get down, have a look down inside here. Again, there's some of your racing cables. And there's the inside structure of the aircraft. This one has a tail wheel, which I suppose most of the replicas do. So there's a Fokker DR1 in the traditional red scheme that may give you some idea, although you may be sick of seeing Fokker DR1s until you get your own one done. But up above us, James?
This is a Royal Aircraft Factory SE5 Alpha, which was a dedicated fighter plane of World War I. This one is painted to depict 2 Squadron Australian Flying Corps, serial number D6995, which was flown by a gentleman called Lieutenant Frank Albury. And he was known for being a one-legged fighter pilot. Australia was the only Commonwealth country in World War I to have their own separate air force to the Royal Flying Corps, and these aircraft flew with Royal Flying Corps aircraft, all very similarly painted, and this one belongs to us. Lieutenant Albury lost his leg when he actually served in the army and had to get permission from the King to be able to train as a pilot and fly and serve Australia again.
So there you have the above, the SE5A, with its opponent, the DR1, down below.
So here we have an original 1917 World War I rotary engine. At the moment for us it's a static display. It came from a French aircraft, and with maintenance and some time, we will get this back into an aircraft to fly. In Australia, there are 6 known rotary engines, and we have 3. We have this one on static. We have a 1918 model that's currently attached to a Fokker D8 Flying Razor, and we also have the reproduction on the III Eindecker. Here we have the French design Newport 24. It is painted with French markings, and officially Australia only flew models 11, 17 and 24. However, during the war, like many other countries, they flew whatever they found, stole or could rebuild. The Newports also originally were designed with a rotary engine, With the Lycoming engine in it at the moment, there would be a difference of approximately 10 inches of where the nose would have been. The difference between the models could have been a few inches in the fuselage, a squared off tail. There was a 2-seat version that were not fighters. So if you could fly one Newport, you could fly any Newport.
I'd like to thank James Smith. James is a volunteer here at TAVAS. He's ex-Navy, but we won't hold that against him. Good bloke. He's learned to fly at the moment. He's heavily involved with TAVAS, does a great job, and everything that goes on here, flying displays, workmanship, you name it, and he knows this place backward. So thanks, mate.
Cheers, buddy.
Really appreciate it.
No worries.
Thanks, James. The museum also has displays along the walls of the early pioneers of aviation, and I've just picked two here. There's Lawrence Hargrave, who was the man who developed the concept of the box kite and refined it, flying it over the edge of cliffs down near Wollongong, south of Sydney, where today you can even go and see hang gliders and paragliders doing exactly the same thing that he did. And then the other frame there is just shows some of the early aircraft that were flown in Australia. John Doigan designed and built his own aircraft. We already saw or referred to that in our visit down at the Australian National Aviation Museum at Moorabbin. And here we are, some more history on the wall. Australian Airmen at War. One squadron, AFC, the first true fighter squadron. It was even involved with Lawrence of Arabia, you see there. Sir Richard Williams, the first student pilot of the AFC, and also the Chief of Staff, generally considered the father of the Royal Australian Air Force. So we have all this history being put on display. Here we are, as I said earlier, one squadron 100 years ago with the Bristol fighter, today with the Super Hornets. Two squadron 100 years ago with the SE5, today with the wedge tail. $100 years ago, and that's the DH9 and the classic Hornet of today. Classic Hornet, 4 squadron with the Camel. Today is the training squadron for the forward air controllers. So there we are. Brilliant history is being presented around here. Now, we don't want to upset our Canadian friends, so we won't bring it up about who shot down the Red Baron. It was really the Australians who did it. But anyway, the last survivors, some of the survivors that have been around, lived till quite late. You know, before the war, the triplanes, different countries, more than 3 wings. Here you are, here's a nice set of plans for a Camel. Rotary engines, a great deal of history here. Learn how the interrupter gear works, what the significance of the Flanders poppy is to Remembrance Day and the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month 1918. and what some of the Australian airmen did after the war. Ross and Keith Smith, first to fly from England to Australia. Hudson's Fish and Paul McGuinness, who started off Qantas. And Charles Kingsford Smith and Charles Ulm, who were the first to fly the Pacific. And along this wall we have the Australian aces of World War I. And I'm not sure how much I've got left on this, so I'll be very quick with this. And here we are. We're starting off here with Captain Robert Little with 47 victories. Roderick Dallas with 39. Arthur Cobby 29. Beau King with 26, etc. This is a photo of Lieutenant Frank McNamara, the only winner of the VC during World War I of the Australian Flying Corps. And I thank the Department of Defence for this photo. It'd be interesting to tell you the story of some of these aces, of what they achieved in later life. Some of them served again during the Second World War. Many rose to senior positions in both the RAAF and the RAF. One even made the position of Air Marshal. So they ended up leading distinguished careers after the First World War. And here are some photos of the different aircraft, starting off with the Bristol fighter. The scenario with the two Super Hornets and the Bristol fighter represents the celebration of the 100th year of one squadron, and I thank the Department of Defence for those photos. Some of the pictures here you'll see are noted from James Smith, and you can see that the aircraft are all flying aircraft, or most of them are, and that these were taken at the last air show last year, or I think it was last year. Yeah. And here we have a reenactment of a classic fighter duel with the Bristol fighter, the Fokker DR1 and the SE5. And here we have the Newport 24, the Fokker D8 and the Fokker E3. Then we have the Henry Farman box kite and a great flight line view of the Great War flying display that we held. For those of you who might want to learn a little bit more about the early years of flight, the museum has available a DVD and a book. The DVD is on who was the first to fly, challenging the Wright brothers, and the book is the one-legged fighter pilot. We've already talked about him, and that book was written by Andrew Carter, one of the founders of the museum. So you can contact the museum for both of those if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the early years of flight. Well, I hope you enjoyed our visit to the Australian Vintage Aviation Society Museum at Caboolture, a totally different museum to what we've seen before. Until next time.